So everyone in this room knows that meeting rising world energy demand in an environmentally responsible manner is an enormous technical challenge, and perhaps an even bigger political challenge. I'm going to talk mainly about fusion energy, although it's not technically fully developed. I'm going to talk about it because I think it deserves to be better known because of its enormous potential. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to be here today, talk to you about fusion, and listen to the many other interesting talks. I don't want to give the impression that fusion could be the solution. There is no silver bullet. The solution's going to be grabbing everything we can of everything that's going. But fusion could be part of a solution. Actually, if you ask me my three priorities, they would be number one, efficiency, number two, efficiency, number three, efficiency. And in efficiency, I include just avoiding using energy by designing better ventilated buildings, for example. But there's been a lot of discussion of efficiency already today, with which I agree, and I'm not going to say anything more about it. I'm going to talk about the supply side, particularly the supply of electricity. Now, it's important to remember that electricity only uses 1/3 of primary energy. So it's only 1/3 of the problem. However, that percentage is rising, and it's bigger in the developed world. And if we had an environmentally responsible source of limitless energy, we'd be home free, because more or less everything we do or want to do, except flying, we can do with electricity. Now, where are we getting our electricity from? In rounded figures, it's 70% fossil fuel, 15% nuclear, 15% hydro. Seems to be 100%. I rounded the figures. There's other, 1.9%. That's mainly burning waste and a little bit of wind and solar. So the renewables today are very small. They could and should be more. We've got to take everything that's going. And encouraged by a carbon tax, no doubt they will be going up. And in some parts of the world, they can be quite significant. In my country, for example, there's very good potential with wind, waves, and tide. But there's no wind and waves in Switzerland, for example. So it's going to be different in different parts of the world. And globally, with one possible exception, I'd be very surprised if we get to more than 10% of electricity from wind and solar. Well, wind, anyway. The exception, in principle, is solar. There's lots of solar energy reaching the Earth. If you covered 1% of the world's surface, it's a small percentage but a large area, sorry, let me say 0.5% of the world's energy with solar voltaics, converting to electricity at 15% efficiency, which is the sort of thing you can easily buy, that would produce more than our current total energy use. Total, not just electricity. Today, however, solar is only 0.04% of electricity. What's the problem? First, it's too expensive, but the price is coming down. It's getting to be a factor of 2 or 3 from the retail price in this country, so it's getting to be worth consumers, but it's a long way to go till it gets to the generating price and starts going into the grid. That would mean coming down to the price more or less of the price of glass. Possibly that can be done, and anyway, the generating cost of other fuels is going to go up. So we've got to try and do it because the potential is enormous. The other problem is, of course, storage. There's no solar there at night. How are we going to store it? Maybe in hydrogen, but if you turn solar to hydrogen and then to electricity, it's more complicated and expensive, and in every step you lose some energy. But the potential of solar is enormous. It must be a research priority. Otherwise, there's hydro, which perhaps can be increased, but not greatly, maybe at most a factor of 2 worldwide, fossil and nuclear. We're going to use the remaining fossil fuels. So carbon capture is important. We can't do it yet, but we've got to, it's not been done on a big scale. We've got to try to do it. Burning the fossil fuels more efficiently is important. Today, the average efficiency of a coal power plant is 30%. The state of the art is 45%. And we've got to push for higher efficiency, which needs better materials, work at higher temperatures. Nuclear, I agree with Alan, yes. But if we expand grossly worldwide, we will be forced into fast breeders, which have some advantages. because we'll be running out of cheaper uranium, and fast breeder reactors burn up a much higher percentage of the fuel. The problem with the fast breeders, they're intrinsically a little bit less safe, I'm not saying they're dangerous, and there's a bigger proliferation risk. And I'd be somewhat uneasy about fast breeders all over the world. But right now, the big one is fossil fuels, then nuclear with a big potential. What else could there be? Well, maybe fusion. Fusion powers the sun and all the stars, and the device, the Joint European Torus, in the laboratory that I have the privilege to run, biggest fusion device in the world, has produced 16 million watts of fusion power, not electricity. So it works. What are the advantages? I'll tell you the disadvantage in a minute. Essentially limitless cheap fuel, no CO2 or atmospheric pollution. The walls become radioactive, but it's decaying away, halving every 10 years. You could recycle in 100 years, and it's intrinsically safe. What is this cheap, limitless fuel? It's lithium and water. Lithium's in the sea and can be got out quite cheaply. It's enough for millions of years. To give you a figure, if you took the lithium in one laptop battery, and you'd need to go with it half a tub of water, you fed it into a fusion power station, if we can make such a thing work, allow for all the inefficiencies, it would make 200,000 kilowatt hours. That's the total US production, one of the highest in the world, divided by the US population for 15 years. The fact that one lithium laptop battery will support an American lifestyle, personal use, and their share of industrial use, transport, etc., street lighting, for 15 years with no CO2, for me, is a reason to give it a go until we find a showstopper, or unless it looked impossibly expensive. And at the moment, neither of those things are the case. Now, what's the problem? The problem is that to do it, you have to heat a large volume of gas to over 100 million degrees, that's 10 times hotter than the core of the sun, and keeping it with magnetic fields from touching the wall. This we can do. We do it daily in my lab. The problem is, to have a net production of power, you've got to do it on a huge scale, maybe 2,000 cubic meters. We're at about 80 cubic meters today. And that's the difficulty. You could build a coal power station, sit on this podium, and demonstrate it works. Fusion, there's a threshold for net power production. And nobody's going to do it till you've shown you can do it. So there's a chicken and egg problem. So we've been doing it slowly, systematically, with inadequate funding. And I'm currently convening a group that's giving input to the European Union's Strategic Energy Technology Plan. And we're arguing that we should, in parallel with a very systematic program, which should be kept going through this device heater, go out and build a power station as soon as we can. And we think it could be done within 20 years. Whether that'll be agreed, I don't know. Two closing remarks on fusion. First, big is beautiful in fusion. Fusion power stations will be big, 1.5 gigawatts, something like that. So they will power big conurbations, but that's fine. That's where half the world's population lives, a percentage that's going up. Secondly, they're very capital intensive. Once you've built them, you might as well run them. So what are you going to do off peak? Maybe produce hydrogen, maybe desalination. So let me, yes, I'd like to finish on fusion and then wrap up with a quote from Clive Cookson, who's the science editor of the Financial Times. And a couple of years, Clive wrote, even if ITER, this world project, runs well over budget and costs $1 billion a year, that will be well worth it for even a 20% chance of another major energy option. 20%, in my view, is very, very pessimistic, but I think the spirit of that is absolutely right. These are small sums of money on the scale of the energy market to produce what is potentially another major option. So to wrap up, do I think we can make it in the energy problem? Now, there's been a lot of discussion of the wedges. They were quoted this morning. The idea we take the problem, we divide it by 7, find technologies, each of which could deliver a 1/7 of the growing energy without CO2. And that's given the people, Bernd Sokolov and Pakala, who invented these wedges, only need 7, and they found 15. So it's given the people the impression you can make it. But be very careful. They themselves say these wedges reduce a heroic challenge to a series of monumental tasks, and by God, they are monumental. I'll give you 2 examples. Someone this morning said they're talking about a couple of 100,000 windmills. No, it's 2 million windmills. That's building just under one a day for the next 50 years worldwide. They talk about 800 gigawatts with carbon capture. That's building one every 6 weeks for the next 50 years, but we don't have carbon capture yet. And you read the fine print, they say at 50% efficiency, those plants. But carbon capture absorbs energy, so that would have to be 60% efficient before carbon capture. So that's way beyond the current state of the art. So their wedges, don't be fooled. Each one is very, very, very difficult. Nevertheless, they do show that although the challenge will be enormous, it's not going to be impossible, at least until the end of fossil fuels, when we're going to need some more wedges. Am I an optimist or a pessimist about this? Well, I know a definition of a pessimist, which is that a pessimist is an optimist who is properly informed. I think I'm properly informed, but nevertheless I'm an optimist. Why am I an optimist? I think because more and more people are beginning to understand they have to change their behaviors, maybe their lifestyles. Business is getting interesting, as we've learned. And particularly, I talk to a lot of students. The young people understand the challenge. And more politicians, and we've heard it here around the world, are saying the right words. They're not doing all the right things yet, but I think it'll come. So I remain optimistic, but the challenge is huge. Thank you.